The global death toll from viral infections soared to more than 24,000, and over 3 billion people were locked down in their homes, triggering a massive financial shock worldwide. The United States now has the highest number of infections in the world, with over 85,000 confirmed cases. But it's looking as though major players are still divided. So what's the economic cost of social distancing for the U.S., and how is the U.S. market reacts to the pandemic? On this, I spoke with Adam Poulsen, the president of the Peterson Institute, on what he believes should be the top priorities on the global economy. Let's listen in. Joining us in Washington, D.C., Adam Poulsen, president of the Peterson Institute. Mr. Poulsen, what a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you for having me, Tian Wei.
Mr. Poulsen, what are we facing now? Is this 1930s or 2008 and 9?
I don't think it's either. I think China is demonstrating, as some of your neighbors are, that if you control the biology, you can have a return to normalcy in the economy too. I think the fact that Western Europe and the U.S. are facing such a shock is in part because we're not as aggressively managing the disease.
While you were talking about it, I had a long sigh. Probably wouldn't be able to see, but things are already what it is now. So what's next?
I'm sighing too.
Yeah.
It's a very sad situation. There are human beings dying and suffering. From an economic point of view, what's next is that the U.S. and Western Europe have to go into an economic coma for about, we don't know, 2 to 3 months probably, maybe longer if they are unsuccessful in stopping disease transmission.
Mr. Poulsen, is there models being studied about what's likely to be the economic cost of, let's just say, once implementing social distancing in the right and strict way for the next 2 to 3 and even 4 months? What does that mean to the U.S. economy?
It's an enormous shock. So if you essentially zero out the restaurant sector, the hotel sector, the tourism sector, haircuts, personal services, you're zeroing out a huge share of the economy, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the economy. As you mentioned, there are some other things that will go up. Delivery services is one, medical demands and production of medical goods is another, but not enough to offset.
Things are very complicated, but let me ask you about the economic side of the story. Mr. Poulsen, you've been talking about many years ago the independence of the central bank. Now, what do you make of the Fed's recent effort of do whatever it takes approach?
I think it shows that the Fed under Chairman Powell is learned the big lessons from the financial crisis of 2008 to 10. That you don't hesitate, you try to get ahead of things, that you get messy by making markets and providing credit against assets across a wide range of types, that you do what you're going to do and ignore what the president says or doesn't say. And importantly, you do some international things like swap lines for currencies, which the Fed has agreed with a number of major central banks. And so I think the Fed is doing a pretty good job. I think, as they acknowledge, it's not going to lead to recovery. This is about helping. They're essentially creating a bridge loan to get everybody through the next few months so that you don't have premature bad loans, premature business failures. But they can't stimulate the economy. They can't force people to go out. They can't force people to work. They can't force people to get well.
So what is the best way? Handing out banknotes to the common folks? Would they be encouraged to buy? And also, if you look at the side effect of what's going on right now, of course, some of the jobs that you earlier mentioned will be scrapped up. However, there are others, for example, deliveries, drivers, these kind of simple jobs, but they're still very crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the biggest thing that the U.S. should be doing is what we call fiscal policy, but of a particular kind, which is providing much more extensive unemployment benefits so that people who either lose their jobs or temporarily leave their jobs because the businesses they work for have financial problems are still around and still have money. And this is why the proposals include cash handouts, include expansions of unemployment, include incentives and loans for businesses to retain their workers. It includes special loans and grants for small business. This is the program that in varying ways Germany, France, and the UK have done, and I think ultimately will be successful. Certainly the best we can do.
But on the other hand, Mr. Poulsen, if we take a look at the bigger picture, where does the money come from? Would that coming from printing money? If that is the case, what does it mean for the rest of the world and the fate of the dollar and the financial stability of the world?
Well, I don't think it's going to come through printing money just yet. There are a lot of people with a lot of savings, even after the losses of the stock market, and they all want to buy U.S. Treasuries right now. That's not a good sign. That's a bad sign about the state of the world, that everybody wants to buy U.S. government securities. But it means that the government can issue that debt, and it's not through printing money. It's through people selling other assets and buying treasuries. So it is being directly financed. In terms of the rest of the world, right now, to go with that flight into treasuries and to some degree into Chinese renminbi and Norwegian krona and Swiss francs, but primarily U.S. dollar treasuries, the dollar is going up. And I think until China and some of your neighbors like South Korea start showing strong recoveries, which I'm hoping will come in the next few weeks, the dollar will probably keep going up.
Having said that, though, recently, you've been talking about, Mr. Poulsen, nationalist approach in the economies. That tendency is becoming even more as we are witnessing the spread of the pandemic worldwide. Explain what you're saying, and also help us to understand whether there is enough attention to the warning you just sent out.
So I and some colleagues at our institute have been writing about what we call economic nationalism. Some people use the term populism. You view the world in zero-sum terms, that harms come from outside, good comes from inside, that risk comes from outside, better not to have risk by shutting yourself down, and you try to take advantage of other societies, and you try to be conflictual and threatening. I think you and I have talked before about this in the context of the trade battles between the U.S. and China. It's dangerous along a number of lines. It's dangerous even from a public health point of view, as we're now seeing with the European Union restricting exports of medical equipment and supplies while the U.S. is short of them and poor countries are totally out of luck. Over time, as bad as this crisis is right now, shutting yourself down isn't going to work. It's also bad because it leads to additional problems. I refer to it as an opportunistic infection, that there are people like the politicians I mentioned who try to take advantage of fear over the pandemic, hatred of foreigners, fear of foreigners, that they then try to get self-serving policies, get more power, create more problems. And this tends to make the economy worse rather than better.
However, earlier, as you pointed out very clearly, also earlier, Mr. Poulsen, that there were already, so much a political call for decoupling. Let's just say the example between China and the United States, particularly coming from Washington, that call. So do you think there will be a domino effect already taking place? Is it already too late?
I don't know if it's too late, but I certainly fear that there is an effect taking place already. I've spoken in the past about what I've called the corrosion of globalization, that globalization, including, keeps going, but the quality of it has gotten more and more uneven. There are holes in part of it, weaknesses in part of it. Obviously, the politics behind the pandemic make it easier to do that, and there's certainly people, for example, in the Trump administration who are trying to take advantage of this moment to decouple further, not just from China, but starting with China. I think in the end, this isn't going to work, but there's a real risk that we may have to go through several years of people learning the costs of doing this before we can turn it around.
Adam Poulsen, really appreciate it. A lot to learn, and certainly looking forward to talking to you again as things develop. Take good care of yourself and also your beloved ones in Washington.
Thank you for making time for me.
Thank you. And clinicians. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Many cities and areas in China are gradually easing lockdowns. Many industries are also slowly going back in business. After 2 months of closures, what challenges lie ahead? Small and medium-sized enterprises were the hardest hit, so how can they survive or even, for many, revive customer appetite? Is this going to be the global trend? Earlier, I talked to Dr. Liang Hong, the chief economist of the CICC, or China International Capital Corporation. Let's hear what she had to say. And for more about that, we're joined by Liang Hong, chief economist with CICC, China International Capital Corporation. Ms. Liang, welcome to our program.
Welcome.
Tell me more about your assessment of the Chinese situation when it comes to the general economy.
I think when the virus outbreak first happened, a lot of people, including us, was thinking this will be a similar progress like SARS. The economy will have a very short-term negative impact during Q1, and during Q2, the economy should be able to gradually recover. This is on the assumption that the virus will be successfully contained within China. I think at this point, it's very clear China has contained quite effectively the spread of the outbreak. The new information or new negative shock was really from the global spread of the virus. And it looks like in Q2, major economies, including the US, Europe, will be in a kind of suspense mode. And that will very likely to have a significant negative impact to China's export demand. So if we combine these two, within the first half of the year, the Chinese economy probably will report fairly weak results despite our success of containing the virus. I think at the moment, if we assume the rest of the world can contain the virus before the end of the first half of the year, then we would assume the Chinese economy will recover from the second half.
Would one country's stimulus package be enough to really generate the real economy? Because we're not seeing today, it's not the other parts of the economy, it's really the real economy that is suffering right now for any country, I guess. What about for that?
When it comes to stimulus of the economy, it needs a global effort. But I think different countries are at different stage. I think China still today are what we have seen the data, the virus is very effectively being contained. So for China, I think there's much more room to allow real economic activities to come back to normal. For places like Europe, and particularly in the US, I think the priority at the moment is still to contain the virus rather than talking about stimulus.
But Dr. Liang, is there much desire, as you have noticed in China, to spend? I mean, if you want to really generate the economy, particularly the service sector, the spending power of the public is extremely crucial, particularly when you don't have outside support of the market.
I actually find the Chinese consumers fairly resilient and optimistic. I think, again, the policy should help with sustaining the income growth. But when it comes to the question whether the consumers are optimistic enough or they're too bearish, I actually think the Chinese consumers have proven they're fairly resilient.
One of the
and you probably have heard of the questions. People ask, what are your top one on the top one shopping list after the pandemic? You have seen cars, you have seen going to a favorite restaurant or even buying a house on top of the list.
What do you think so far China has done right or sounds like doing right in terms of economic policies?
I think they have. Again, if we compare this episode vis-a-vis the 2008 financial crisis, again, back then it was a big demand shock. This time it is a supply-led demand shock. So we have a quite big contraction of the economy. I think compared with the last time, I think we have seen a lot of fiscal spending or support this time, but not so much coming from infrastructure spending, but a lot of tax cut, cash flow support for smaller, medium-sized companies and for vulnerable part of the society. So far, I think the easing from the fiscal side and some help from the monetary side are proper. But I think looking forward, particularly looking at Q2, when all the major economies shut down, essentially, and we're anticipating a big contraction in China's export demand, I think it's fairly clear China's policy support needs to do more. With the Fed cutting rate to zero, there's more room for the Chinese central bank to cut its own rates and to ease financial conditions. But for fiscal side, again, with 80–90% of the workers return to work, again, the idea of some infrastructure spending that try to boost demand, try to make up the hole in employment shortfall, all of that will be on the agenda.
On the other hand, we earlier talking to Adam Posen coming from the Peterson Institute. He talked about the U.S. Treasury. He also talked about the U.S. dollar. How will volatility there, including rise and fall, likely to have an impact on how China is going to fix or adjust its own monetary and fiscal policies?
I guess there are a lot of uncertainties still out there. I think in my mind, there are three. First is how the U.S. is containing the virus. It looks scary at the moment, but we should know within 2 weeks whether the outbreak will be more similar to Italy or it will be more contained. Secondly, like Adam is mentioning here, a lot of concern is whether some of the damage people or investors are anticipating in the economy, whether that will lead to some financial market meltdown in the U.S. Given it has been a bull market for 10 years and has been under a very low interest rate environment for such a long time. So we have seen all these volatilities, limit up, limit down, suspension of trade that we haven't seen for decades. This is a reflection of the underlying stress in the financial system. So again, for that, we probably need a couple more months to feel certain. I think China tries to be the stability or provide more stability to its own economy and to its own society. And by doing that, it becomes a source of relative stability in the market. So I think in the short term, nobody will be surprised to see asset prices, whether it's gold, oil, dollar, or your stock market going through gyrations. But we have seen much more calm in the Chinese asset markets. And I think the RMB will be a very crucial anchor in the system. So we have seen RMB depreciate, appreciate in a wider range compared with the past, but much more stable compared with a lot of other emerging market currencies.
When you say stabilizing anchor, that's the word you used, Dr. Liang. How stable will it be?
Because we want to do that. I think, again, if we look at a couple of things, again, Chinese policy making is very much domestic driven, but because China is the second largest economy in the world and the largest trading economy in the world, if China could do a relatively good job on that, it provides more stability to the global system. So when I said the relative stability is, again, the eye is squarely on the situation in China, how we contain the virus and how comfortable we can allow economic activities to resume normal. And also at the moment, it looks like we will try to put what people call, we will put a mask at the border for all the imported cases.
Dr. Liang, you may have already noticed quite a while that there are a lot of people who are trying to do the comparison between what's going on now, not to 2008 and 9, but rather to 1930s, the big recession. So when you think about that, the policies and also the measures, the suggestions you raised in your answers, are they strong enough? Or actually they should be much stronger, as some have argued. If you don't spend money now, you're going to have no chance to spend money anymore in the future.
I think this time the real question is how prolonged this period of deep recession will be for the rest of the world. I don't think China will be affected through exports, but I think there are certain real worries about Europe and the US. So again, when people make comparisons in the 1920s, 30s, you could even say the 2008 was similar to, we're still living in the aftermath of that shock. So that's why all major economies are running up huge debt, particularly government debt, and are having interest rate at this very low or zero level or even negative levels. So we're not out of the woods yet. So I think for China, again, to navigate through this period, experiences, knowledges, but calm. And we should not act in a haste and be scared by the doomsayers.
I see.
I think it's fairly clear we're increasingly a domestic demand-driven economy, and there's still a lot of potentials for large pockets of domestic demand that has not been turned on. The part that China remains to be vulnerable is we're still, 17% of our GDP is export related, and that will continue to be negatively affected by what's going on in the rest of the world.
Yeah, as we know, the small and medium-sized companies in China are contributing in a great way the employment opportunities in this country. Now, what would that mean for the employment issue and the overall relation between the economy and the employment opportunities, Dr. Liang? Your assessment.
I think we have already seen even our official unemployment rate has gone up 1 percentage point. So clearly, especially the low-end services, or tourism, consumer demand-related services are being hit very hard. But again, if that's mostly virus or the coronavirus-related contraction, I think as the virus being contained more, we start to see people going back to the shops or going back to the restaurants, and even officials in certain provinces started to demonstrate, it's okay to consume and it's okay to go out. But I think there's another question of in 3 months' time, we should have college graduates coming to the job market, and many of them are still lingering there. So again, the job situation will be fairly challenging for China this year. I think the silver lining here is China has a fairly high savings rate. Household has a fairly high savings rate, and we're a family-based kind of social security system. So again, there will be losses of income, but I don't think we are that terribly worried about personal bankruptcies or people are being pushed back to below poverty lines. I think that remains to be a concern for places like the U.S., who traditionally are not well equipped to handle that kind of situation, and where savings rate for the household has been extremely low.
Dr. Liang Hong, Chief Economist of CICG, China International Capital Corporation, talking to us from Hong Kong. Really appreciate it, Dr. Liang. Take good care of yourself and also of your beloved ones. Thank you.
Thank you.